Donald Trump has been disqualified from running as a presidential candidate in 2 states, Colorado and Maine. So what does it mean for next year's general election? Mr. Trump is the clear frontrunner to be the Republican nominee in November 2024 and challenge Joe Biden for the White House. His campaign described both decisions as atrocious and an attempted theft of an election. The top election official in Maine ruled the former president was ineligible to run because of his actions around the Capitol riot. Colorado's highest court issued a similar, unprecedented ruling just days earlier. But it is still uncertain whether Mr. Trump's name will appear on the ballot when the 2 states pick their Republican candidate in the coming months, as both rulings are on hold while an appeals process plays out. The U.S. Supreme Court has said it will hear the Colorado case in February, with its ruling applying nationwide. Unlike in Colorado, where the state Supreme Court ruled on Mr. Trump's eligibility, in Maine it was decided by the top electoral official because of a quirk in its constitution. Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, a Democrat, issued a 34-page ruling that said Mr. Trump must be removed from its Republican primary ballot because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Section 3 disqualifies people who engage in insurrection or rebellion from holding federal office. Her order said Mr. Trump, over the course of several months and culminating on January 6, 2021, used a false narrative of election fraud to inflame his supporters and direct them to the Capitol. Ms. Bellows, an elected official, was accused of making a politically motivated decision by the Trump campaign. She denied this and said it was thorough and based on the rule of law. Speaking to BBC News after her ruling, Ms. Bellows said it was her duty to uphold election laws in her state, and that she hoped the Supreme Court will settle this matter nationwide. What happened in Colorado? On the 19th of December, the Colorado Supreme Court said it found clear and convincing evidence that President Trump engaged in insurrection. It was the first time Section 3 had been used to disqualify a presidential candidate. A very quick guide to U.S. Republican primaries. Voters react to Trump being kicked off Colorado's ballot. What is the 14th Amendment? The lengthy 213-page ruling said Mr. Trump's actions in the build-up to the 6th of January 2021 did constitute insurrection. Can Donald Trump still stand in the 2024 election? Yes. These rulings only apply to Colorado and Maine respectively. Hours after Maine's ruling, California's elected Secretary of State, a Democrat, ignored calls to remove Mr. Trump from the state's Republican primary ballot, saying it was a matter for the courts. Michigan's top court this week declined to hear a case seeking to disqualify Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is far ahead of his Republican rivals, so can still win his party's nomination without competing in Colorado or Maine. In the US, the 2 main parties nominate a presidential candidate by holding a series of state primaries and caucuses that begin in January. In terms of the general election, in both states, Joe Biden won against Donald Trump in 2020 by a wide margin, and it is unlikely that Mr. Trump will need to win the states to enter the White House once more. What happens next? The U.S. Supreme Court has confirmed it will intervene to offer a ruling that would apply nationally. That's because the Colorado Republican Party and Donald Trump himself appealed the state's ruling to the Supreme Court. The top U.S. court decided on the 5th of January that it would fast-track the case and hear arguments at some point in February. Mr. Trump's name will remain on the ballot in Colorado until the Supreme Court makes a ruling. The Maine ruling is also on hold, pending a legal appeal in the state's courts. Any decision by the U.S. Supreme Court will supersede this and apply nationally. The U.S. justices will have to consider the legal arguments, which will take time, but they will be under pressure to decide before the Colorado and Maine primaries on the 5th of March, the so-called Super Tuesday, when the greatest number of states hold ballots. The balance of that court has shifted to more conservative in recent years, thanks in part to 3 justices who were appointed by Mr. Trump when he was president. Almost everything about the situation is unprecedented, leaving lingering questions about how this may affect the general election. Maeva Marcus, the director of the Institute for Constitutional Studies at George Washington University, says the same rationale behind the Colorado ruling that disqualified Mr. Trump from the primary ballot would hold for the general election. But it's too early to say what will happen in the general election in November until the issue works its way through the courts. she said. Where do legal experts stand on this? There are two key legal issues to consider. One is whether Mr. Trump's actions in the build-up to the storming of the US Capitol amount to insurrection. The other is whether the office holders that Section 3 was aimed at barring should include the president. A lower court in Colorado has already ruled that Mr. Trump engaged in insurrection, but the law did not apply to the office of the presidency. The Colorado Supreme Court disagreed, and top legal scholars are divided on whether this law should apply to Mr. Trump. Lawyers for Mr. Trump dispute that he engaged in insurrection and argue his remarks to supporters on the day of the 2021 riot were protected by his right to free speech. Did Trump's words at rally incite the riot? How big are Donald Trump's legal problems? What is the political impact? Mr. Trump's campaign said the latest ruling was another example of the justice system being used to persecute him. But there could be wider implications for the general election. Dozens of other US states have similar lawsuits trying to bar Mr. Trump from running, and the decisions in Colorado and Maine could make it more likely some of them succeed. If Mr. Trump was stopped from running in a state where he and Mr. Biden are neck and neck, that could be critical in a presidential race that is expected to be closely fought. The Supreme Court stepping in will ensure there cannot be a patchwork of different rules on eligibility across the states. Trump has campaigned on vastly expanding the authority of the federal government, particularly the executive branch, as expressed by his support of Project 2025, which calls for a reimposition of the Jacksonian spoils system, immediately invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807 to deploy the military onto American streets, and directing the Department of Justice to go after domestic political enemies. Trump has been leaning into violent and authoritarian rhetoric throughout the campaign. Trump has increasingly used dehumanizing and violent rhetoric against his political enemies. His 2024 campaign has been noted for leaning into white supremacist, nativist, and anti-LGBT rhetoric. The campaign is unfolding as Trump faces the legal aftermath of 4 criminal indictments filed against him in 2023, as well as a civil investigation of the Trump Organization in New York. The campaign has continued to promote false claims that the former 2020 election was stolen, and comes in the wake of Trump's unprecedented attempts to overturn the 2020 United States presidential election and its culmination in the January 6th United States Capitol attack, which has been widely described as an attempted coup d'etat or self-coup. National primary polling shows Trump leading by 50 points over other candidates. After he won a landslide victory in the 2024 Iowa Republican presidential caucuses, Trump was generally described as being the Republican Party's presumptive nominee for president, with a process of consolidation now underway. The questions of Trump's eligibility to run for president in 2024 are delineated by the U.S. Constitution. 2 amendments addressing this issue are the 14th and 22nd Amendments. On the one hand, some scholars have argued, although Trump has been indicted multiple times, neither the indictments nor any resulting convictions would render him ineligible for the office. On the other hand, conservative originalist scholars have argued that Trump is ineligible because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies. On December 19, 2023, the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that Trump was disqualified from holding office and that his name must be removed from the Colorado Republican primary ballot. Trump's campaign said that he would appeal the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. On December 28, 2023, Maine's Secretary of State banned Trump from Maine's Republican primary ballot. The Trump campaign said that they would appeal the decision in Maine state courts, and the Secretary of State suspended the ruling until the court's decision. On January 5, 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court said it would to decide if Trump was eligible to appear on Colorado's Republican primary ballot, expediting the case to hear oral arguments on February 8th.